guys, and welcome to the very first episode of Capital Chat. I'm here on a very windy evening at the Mugger Lane Solar Park near the suburb of Hume in South Canberra. And the reason I came today is because I want to talk about energy generation. Obviously, one of the big topics coming up in this next election is where are we going to get our energy from in the future? The Labor Party is advocating for things like this, big solar parks. Meanwhile, the Liberals are advocating for things like nuclear energy. So I've decided I want to talk about my opinions on nuclear and explain why, despite thinking that nuclear is actually a really good source of energy, I don't think it's the right mix for Australia. So if you guys might have noticed, I put a poll up on my channel about a week ago asking how you feel like we should handle the nuclear debate with basically three answers. Should we just leave it banned as we currently have it? Should we lift the ban? Or should we lift the ban and also invest in building nuclear power plants? Now, the plurality of you guys came back 39% that you wanted to remove the ban but not do any investment. In fact, investment was actually the smallest. Only 26% of you guys supported investing in nuclear power. And I think, reading the comments, that was the general feeling I was getting from people. People think the ban is a bad idea, don't really see any need to invest in nuclear power. So let me give you my opinions on the topic and why I mostly agree with these people, but I can also see why we should keep it banned. So let's explain why are we even having this debate in the first place. Well, you see, currently Australia gets most of its energy from coal. We also have plenty of coal resources everywhere and it's very abundant. So for the most part, we got our energy from there. But obviously, as we know, climate change is real and thus we need to get off coal as an energy source. There's a problem though. Currently, coal has two things that renewables don't. Coal is centralized, we produce energy in one place, and it's got a flat base load. We can choose how much coal we can generate and we can generate a constant amount as much as we want. Renewables, on the other hand, like this solar park, sure, this solar park is a central location, but this solar park just does not produce the same amount of energy as a coal-fired power station. So we need a bunch of these solar farms and wind farms all over the country. And thus, rather than getting our energy from one single place like our grid's designed, we suddenly need to design a grid that can take energy from everywhere. Along with this is fluctuating. Sure, it was a very hot day today and these solar panels were definitely firing off at full power, but the sun's gone down now. These solar panels aren't really generating much electricity. Wind can sure generate electricity at night, but again, the wind sometimes doesn't blow. So we've got a problem that we have two issues. We need to now have a grid that can handle decentralized energy, and we need to have another way of being able to produce energy when these things aren't producing energy. And that's when nuclear hopes to fix it. Rather than having to redesign the grid, we can instead just replace the coal-fired power stations with nuclear power stations, which sounds good. However, there are issues with this solution. The first and the main one, let me get something straight out of the way, right? Nuclear is safe. It is safe and generates a lot of electricity. So I'm not going to lecture you about how it's going to be another Chernobyl or it's a nuclear bomb, because we know those arguments just do not work. Nuclear is safe, and fun fact, I actually support nuclear being generated in other countries. So why don't I support it being generated here? Well, for a start, we don't really have a nuclear industry. We have Lucas Heights in Sydney that nuclear reactor for mostly for research purposes, but we've never had big nuclear power stations. Thus, there is no expertise or industry. If we were to build nuclear power plants here, we'd very likely need to hire in experts from other countries to help build it. And we'd also need to build up a framework around it. We have a bunch of laws on how we build this stuff. We don't need to have these laws currently because we just don't have nuclear power. So not only do we have to rewrite a bunch of new laws, we have to get a whole bunch of experts. Just getting this whole thing off the ground could take well over 10 years. And people are like, oh, but you know, this country is building it faster. No, if you look at how fast projects take to get done in Australia, and specifically just Anglosphere countries, we do not build stuff quickly. So I can always guarantee you that it will take 10 years. And that's 10 years we could be building more solar parks, more wind farms, and generating more electricity. So that's one of the main issues with nuclear. It's just expensive and it would take too long to get off the ground. The other thing of it is so not only is that going to take time, it's also going to be expensive. The CSIRO did a cost analysis on how much nuclear energy would generate, and they found out it's just more expensive than renewables. In an age in a cost of living crisis, where we're talking about trying to get cheap energy, the last thing we want is to make energy more expensive. And the CSIRO has determined that renewables will be much cheaper than nuclear power. But then people say, well, but nuclear is super cheap. The only way to make nuclear cheap is to run the power stations at 100%. And this brings me to another problem about baseload power. The problem with nuclear is it needs to be basically running at 100% all the time. And the problem is, when it's running at 100%, what does it leave these places doing? Imagine it's a really hot and windy day and we want to generate electricity from solar panels and wind turbines. But we can't, because if we started running electricity from these guys, the nuclear power station would have to be ramped down to only 80 or 50% of its capabilities. Now it's suddenly not cost effective to run the nuclear power plant. And that's the problem the CSIRO determined. They determined that the only way to run nuclear does not work with renewable energy. It works against them. And of course, people have attacked the CSIRO over this. Like, you didn't account for this and you didn't account for that. But CSIRO did another study and once again found out that it just isn't cost competitive. And I'm sorry, but I believe the CSIRO over some random journalists, or even worse, people just in their bedrooms just doing the maths on their computer. Because like the CSIRO has access to a lot more information and has a lot more vigorous research. So I'm sorry if I trust them more than just some random think tank who says nuclear is cost effective. So I guess what a lot of you guys are thinking is like, well, if nuclear is not a solution to the baseload firming power, what is? And the answer is, well, we're actually doing a bunch of stuff right now. Obviously, one of the first things that comes to mind is batteries. Building things like those big battery farms that we saw in South Australia. But batteries are obviously more of they're more of the middle solution. They're designed to sort of be able to generate electricity fast. What we actually want are some much more long-term electric storage devices, such as pumped hydro, which is actually quite an old storage method where you pump water to the top of a hill and then the water runs down the hill and generate electricity that way. There is also a new technology coming out in hydrogen fuel cells, which is being pushed by the South Australian government. This is basically the process of just taking water, splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen, and then selling the hydrogen as a clean gas. I call it a clean gas because the reaction where hydrogen burns produces water. Yeah, you basically just turn the hydrogen back into water. It doesn't produce CO2. So it's a way of making a gas reaction that you can run in combustion engines that doesn't produce CO2, which is another great thing. And we can also sell that and make a ton of money off that. So those are the three ways. Batteries, pumped hydro, and hydrogen fuel cells are all solutions I would much greater recommend over a nuclear power station. And again, for those saying that like, oh, the renewables are far off, we're not going to get renewables soon. Do remind you, South Australia has multiple times over the last few years generated over 100% of its electricity through renewables. That means it's not running any power stations. So if South Australia can do it, I'm pretty sure we only have to upscale the grid a few more times and suddenly we can generate 100% of Australia's need. This is the thing I feel like people don't talk about. This is why I think nuclear works for other countries but not Australia. The reason is other countries are small and have a huge population. Australia is big and has quite a small population. Therefore we have huge amounts of land to build things like these solar parks and wind farms. And better, if you don't want them being built on potential farmland, even though I will admit this is not the highest grade farmland, we can also build them out to sea. We've got a ton of coastline as well. So Australia is in a unique position where we can become a renewable energy superpower. And this is the reason why, coming back to my point about the ban, one of the reasons why I kind of in some respects support the ban, because we are meant to be pushing to be a renewable energy superpower, and lifting a ban on nuclear indicates to investors that actually know we actually do want to bring in nuclear power plant. And so investors might be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't invest in renewables since they might be putting some of that money towards building a nuclear power plant. And it could send confusion. Now, I'm not entirely convinced by that argument. So I think I do agree, like, we can lift the ban, because yeah, I do agree. You never know, these small modular nuclear reactors might come online, might be cost effective, and they might be available in the future. But until the technology is there, I just don't see the point in us investing in this stuff. So I hope you enjoyed this first episode of Capital Chat. So I'll be putting up a poll soon on my channel on the topic of the next episode. But also, feel free to put some comments down below about other topics you want to hear me talk about, as I only have a few ideas currently. So I really want to build out a nice big list of topics to talk about. So I really look forward to seeing what other ideas you want to see me talk about in later videos. Until then, I'll see you later.